Some people might be here and you might have never been involved in church or whatever, and you might say, I came here for Charlie and, I don't know about this church thing. That's fine. Welcome. There's a creator that wants to get to know you, that gave you a gift so that you can live forever. You're broken by your nature. You're not going to get enough points on the scoreboard to get you to eternal life. And there is a gift that you can accept that can get you there. The gospel in 4 words is Jesus took my place. The gospel in 3 words is him for me. 2 words, substitutionary atonement, and 1 word, grace. What is grace? We say that a lot. Amazing grace. Well, first we must talk about what justice is. Justice is getting what you deserve, a prison sentence. The judge comes in and say, you broke into the store, you get a year in prison. Mercy is you go in front of the judge, they say, you broke in the store, but you serve a month in prison instead of a year. It's getting less of a sentence. The grace is at your sentencing hearing when someone shows up and says, I'll serve the prison sentence for that guy. That's what Jesus gives you.
We can forgive, but also we must not tolerate sin. If there is anarchy in our society, there is no liberty. The gospel is spread through individuals, through people, through relationships. That's how we will convert the culture back to Christ. We just need to really be out there among people and witnessing to our faith in the way that Charlie did.
2 weeks ago, Charlie Kirk was assassinated in Utah while he was debating students. He is mourned by many supporters as a symbol of civilized debate and common sense. He leaves behind his Catholic wife, Erika, whom we carry in our prayers, and 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter. Charlie Kirk loved Jesus. He was an evangelical Christian, and his events on campuses were not only political, but they will also remain as great moments of Christian apologetics. On his podcast, only a few months before his passing, he mentioned that Protestants did not venerate and love Mary enough. He considered Our Lady to be the cure to many problems of our society. I was personally deeply shocked and moved when I learned the news of the assassination around midnight as I was coming back from a dinner. So I decided to write this special edition of the show to try and understand what Sky News called the week that changed the world. To discuss the challenge that awaits us, I am joined by Carolyn McKinney, writer for Catholic Exchange, a great media I invite you all to follow, which is seeking to make saints in our own times. Carolyn McKinney, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
As I said, I learned the news in the middle of the night. I was appalled by it. How did you learn about the assassination and how did you react?
Yeah, I think it all spread pretty quickly on social, especially on X. I found out on X, and also I had friends texting me the news within 20 minutes of the event happening. It spread so fast, especially among people on the right who were just absolutely shocked. And then the next few hours were just very tense. We didn't know what was going on. We knew that they had taken him to the hospital. There was reports that he had been stabilized at the hospital, and we were all praying for him, of course. And then eventually we learned the news that he had died. Now, this morning I watched something with his pastor who was in the car, or maybe not his pastor, but his friend who was in the car with him. He described the trip to the hospital, and he said that he was killed instantly. Despite their attempts, he was killed instantly. So that is a mercy, I suspect, but the few hours there were just, kind of fog of war, and people had no idea what was going on. And it was just lots of speculation and sadness, of course. But since then, I think there's been a lot of introspection, but also some concerning elements, of course. This event, I think, is precipitating a much more forceful response than the right in America has ever responded to in the past. And I think decades of being the victims of cancel culture here in America, of the left using force against everyday Americans, and especially those on the right, there was only so long that the right could put up with it. And then when it looked as if someone had murdered Charlie, I think there's this kind of natural reaction of, we are done with putting up their force without force of our own. And, the reason that I wrote what I wrote is because I don't want America to go down that path of force and violence. That's not who we are. That's not who we are on the right. Speaking as someone who's been a conservative my whole life, but especially my kids. I have three teenager or adult sons who all knew Charlie and had watched lots of his videos and appreciated his message and followed him in a way, you know what I mean? And so I didn't want them, I wanted them to take the best parts of Charlie and not the parts that maybe the other side is speaking about, or and also the parts that the right is trying to inflame, that certain ones that are more prone to force. So what I wanted my boys to focus on and what I want the right to focus on is his love for Jesus, his love for family, and all the great virtues that he embodied in his life and in his work. I just wanted to remind people that we are better, we do better. We embrace the virtues and we move forward in peace and love and joy and forgiveness and, you know, all those fruits of the spirit that we Christians are called to a higher good, you know.
Indeed, in your article, which you wrote for the Catholic Exchange, What I Hope My Sons Will Learn from the Life of Charlie Kirk, I'd like to quote what I consider to be the most important lines. You say, "I worry that the traumatic loss of a leader like Charlie could tempt some young men towards vengeance. I understand the anger, but vengeance is not the way. Charlie's life testified to a higher road, courage with charity, truth with love. If my sons learn this lesson, they will honor him rightly." How can our generation manage that?
I think what I'm seeing in America is there is a great amount of spiritual awakening happening. And that's thanks to Charlie. So sorry, I'm just a little emotional just thinking about it. But like for example, in my town this week, we've lived in this town for 20 years. And for the first time ever, there was a prayer and worship on the green, which is the village, the center of our town. First time ever. And it was because people were prompted to do something to share their faith because of Charlie. And they're going to do it again next week, you know? And I'm seeing so many stories on social media of men, especially who have never been to church before. They went and picked up a Bible. They went and sat in the pew in church. And so I think that as long as America can turn to faith instead of to vengeance, we have a chance.
And more than ever, will we have to distinguish the sin from the sinner if we want to seek charity? We'll have to learn again how to pray for our enemies, as you described. How do we as Christians embrace forgiveness, and how does it differ from tolerance?
Yeah. I think for a long time, Christian niceness has kind of ruled as the appropriate response for Christians, which is turn the other cheek, which of course Christ asks us to do. However, that often, I think, embodied itself in a certain tolerance. We haven't had men, for example, standing up for their daughters against trans identified individuals participating in their girls' sports teams. Everybody just kind of goes along to get along. And that is this tolerance that has been manipulated into some sort of civic virtue, and I think kind of collapsed into forgiveness in some way. But I think we need to make the distinction that we can forgive, but also we must not tolerate sin, either in our own lives or in our civic life. The more sin affects our community life, the more structures of sin develop and are allowed to flourish, just like the catechism says. You know, catechism talks about not just personal sin, but the structures of sin, because when so many of the people are sinning, it creates actual sinful structures in our society. And when we're not willing to stand up against evil, then that's what's allowed to happen. So we need to forgive, absolutely. Like Tyler Robinson, I hope Erika can publicly forgive him, because that would be an amazing testament to Christian virtue and forgiveness. I really pray that she is able to do that, although that would be obviously so tremendously hard. But forgiveness does not mean that we forget, and it doesn't mean that we tolerate evil either. In fact, we must make sure that we turn around this toleration of evil and start calling it out and start tearing out those structures of sin in our culture that have taken root.
As to tolerance, Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire, pointed out to what I called the Kirk challenge in an article in France. He wrote that the left shot up the open marketplace of ideas that we had in the West. Liberty requires order, and he quotes Chesterton saying, "We need to stop the thought that stops thought." What do you think about this conservative reaction, which is widespreading as we speak?
Yes, I totally agree that liberty does require order. If there is anarchy in our society, there is no liberty. There must be guidelines or goalposts or something that keeps people within a certain acceptable range of behaviors. Celebrating the death of an innocent man, I don't think should be, part of that civic behavior. And I think I liken it to my children, right? Like when our children may have done something wrong or done something or acting in a way that is not consistent with how we require them to act, they'll be removed to their rooms. And we tell them, you may return when you can act in a way that is, acceptable for civil society in this house, basically, because we don't tolerate bad behavior in our house. And the children have to learn how to act accordingly. And so society needs to do some policing of its own. And for a long time that happened. For a long time, both the right and the left policed its more extreme elements by making clear that some things were clearly outside the realm of acceptable behavior. But unfortunately, particularly on the left, that has eroded in the past 10 years. They're not policing the most extreme elements anymore, and that has allowed what Rutgers University called an assassination culture to take hold. There was a Rutgers University report in fall of 2024 that was put out talking about assassination culture, and actually Charlie Kirk had tweeted about this at the time, that 40% of respondents on the left said that it was okay to assassinate someone who disagrees with you. And that's an astoundingly high number. On the right, it was 12%, which is also 12% higher than it should be. So there's definitely an element of force that's coming back into our culture, I think, because our culture is post-Christian in many ways. And so I hope that the example of Charlie and what he stood for, and in some ways what he died for, can help with a resurgence of Christian culture to put down these more extreme elements and bring people back to the virtues, back to Jesus.
And to what extent do you consider we can consider Charlie Kirk as a martyr for his faith, for his ideas, for free speech? A lot of people has canonized him online, generating pictures with AI, depicting him as a saint or in the arms of Jesus. To what extent can we go about martyrdom of Charlie Kirk?
I went to this prayer service in my town, even though I knew it was going to be led by Protestants and their spirituality is not my style, but I went in solidarity with the other Christians in my town. And one thing that was mentioned was Charlie Kirk as a martyr. And it didn't sit well with me, to be honest. I mean, I think in some ways he was a martyr in terms of politically speaking, because he was very outspoken on certain social issues in particular. And, from the information that we have, there's a significant LGBT connection and potentially motive for his murder. But I think we don't even know that. I think we can say with some certainty, but not all certainty. And so I don't like the idea of canonizing him as a martyr. But also, I think we need to understand that we view death and heaven differently than our Protestant brethren. This was actually made clear to me recently. My daughter's friend's father recently passed of cancer, and we went to his funeral. And they were Protestants, and it was very clear to them. They felt very strongly that he was in heaven, and he seemed like a very holy man, a man after the heart of Jesus. But everything about that funeral said he is in the arms of Jesus now, or we have complete certainty that he's in heaven. And that, of course, goes against my Catholic sensibilities because we don't know, right? Unless the church has recognized two miracles and canonized somebody, we don't know that they're in heaven. And we hope that they're in heaven and we pray for them if they are in purgatory. But I think there's just this deeply ingrained he is in heaven mentality that pervades Protestantism, and especially in America, that they they will jump to that conclusion immediately because that is their faith culture, you know. And so our pastor this weekend did speak of Charlie Kirk, and he warned us against this. He says, we cannot assume that Charlie is in heaven, and I want you all to pray for him. If he's in purgatory, he needs our prayers. He's such a good man, and he calls us back to the church no matter the circumstance. And so I think we just, as Catholics, need to recognize the culture of evangelicalism, and that's where they are. It's not surprising to me that this martyrdom language has been taken up because that's an outgrowth of their culture. And I don't know what to do about that. It does make me uncomfortable. I don't think he's legitimately a Christian martyr, for example, although it's possible, I guess. I mean, he was outwardly Christian, and the LGBT community really does hate Christians, at least from what I can tell.
For a few years, especially since the assassination, as you said, we've seen a sort of renewal of faith in the United States, in France as well, but especially in the United States recently. An evangelical renewal, a Catholic renewal as well. Erika Kirk was raised a Catholic. His casket was carried by J.D. Vance. Catholicism is spreading in the US. Yes. Do you witness that, and what is your analysis of this huge phenomenon?
Yes, absolutely. Even Charlie recognized it. And there are even some reports out today or since the assassination that he was very close to becoming a Catholic himself. He recognized it on his show that Catholic and Orthodox as well are experiencing a big resurgence. I think one of the reasons is the younger generations are feeling very lost, like they're on quicksand, you know? They don't have a solid foundation, and they're turning back to the tradition as that foundation. This was true of our family as well. My husband and I are in our 40s right now, but during COVID, and especially with some of the statements by Pope Francis during his pontificate, we felt very uneasy about our culture, about our place in the world, and COVID just blew it all open for us. And so we started attending a Latin Mass parish in our area during COVID. And the reason we did it is because in all of this tumult, we felt like we needed an anchor, we needed a foundation, and we ran to the tradition. We're still at the Latin Mass parish, and I will never leave it because it's provided us this tremendous safe haven and this real anchoring that we couldn't find anywhere else. I think that the younger generation is feeling this even more than us. You know, we're millennials, but Gen Z, I think, is in even more tumult than the millennials were. And so I think men, especially who have been put down in this country by what some have called a toxic feminist culture, they're seeking a better way, and they're seeking to be valued, and they're finding those things in the Catholic Church, and they're finding their voice and their place. And yeah, I'm happy about it. And I'm happy if they find faith in other places like the Orthodox too. Faith in Jesus is better than no faith in Jesus. But I'm glad that a lot of people are turning to Catholic Church because we do have the fullness of faith. And I'm glad to pass this along to people so we can pervade our culture and regain Christendom again.
You are writing for Catholic Exchange, which is one of today's major Catholic platforms online. Would you like to introduce this great media to us?
Yeah, Catholic Exchange has actually been around quite a long time, over 20 years. I think it's an excellent place for Catholics to gain information and knowledge about devotions, to increase and deepen their faith life, a way for Catholics to come together and have discussions about things like this, like Charlie Kirk and his impact on our culture. But also, it includes a lot of information on how you can deepen your own life. There's lots of articles on novenas and different prayers and saints and just anything that can really bring us closer to Christ and his church. Catholic Exchange is putting out there, and it's been a great resource, yes.
What advice would you give to French people willing to spread the faith in the way of Catholic Exchange? We believe the power of the media, of cultural and intellectual life is so powerful today.
Yeah. I think the big thing, one of the things that I've been thinking about since the assassination has been how insulated we tend to be as Christians. We go to our parish, we have Christian friends, circles, we look at media like Catholic Exchange and we might share it, but the gospel is spread through individuals, through people, through relationships. Jesus called these people like his disciples in person. He loved them and challenged them. One of the other reasons I went to this prayer vigil in my town is, I haven't been doing enough, I don't think, in terms of public display of my faith. And I don't want to keep my faith under a bushel, like the gospel says. And so I think one thing that is that we just need to really be out there among people and witnessing to our faith in the way that Charlie did. He talked about Jesus and his saving grace all the time, like in almost every appearance. And do I do that in my daily life? No, I tend not to. But should I? Yes. That's how we will convert the culture back to Christ. We need to be more outward about our faith, need to be reaching more people on a personal level. And I think that's the way forward. We can't just hide behind our keyboards anymore. We can't just put up articles on online places. That's good. I don't think that's enough. So I hope that more Christians will talk about their faith more, especially Catholics. Evangelicals are pretty good at talking about their faith a lot. Catholics, not so much. So I'm trying to learn a lesson from my evangelical brethren who are very open about their faith, and we need to be open about ours too. So
Carolyn McKinney, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
it was great to be with you. Thank you.